So if you look at your handout, active means, and this is Merriam's definition, there really isn't anything in the exercise world that does this, but it's characterized by action rather than sitting, contemplating, speculating. Okay, so something, you're up and moving. Better than laying down all day. Physical activity is defined as bodily movement that produced by the contraction of skeletal muscles, so it's very kind of concrete, that increases energy expenditure above a basal line. So it has many different categories. It can be occupational, mailman, very active, household, cleaning takes a lot of energy, leisure time, which is where exercise usually fits, and then transportation. I walk to work, I bike to work, I run to work, I do a recumbent, a bike, I skate to work. Those would be exercise or activity with transportation. So the term exercise is very specific. So it is a physical activity that's planned, structured, has a outcome in mind, repetitive, purposeful. Usually you're trying to change one outcome of physical fitness or to become more fit. So it's very specific. So when you talk to patients, nail down, are you exercising or are you active? It's different. Exercise will produce fitness. It will improve your heart, improve your lungs. Activity doesn't necessarily do that. It will expend energy, but it doesn't necessarily make you more fit. Depends on the intensity of it. So here are examples of moderate physical activity. They go anywhere from, oh, there's a variety. So washing or waxing your car. So if that's what somebody did for a living, that's different than doing it once every 2 or 3 weeks. If you shovel snow in the winter, that's exercise. So again, some of it's different. I mean, I guess it depends on where you live. In Minnesota, do you shovel snow or do you use a snowblower?
Long driveway too.
Long. So how many days of the week might you shovel snow?
Every day.
Every day?
In
Really?
Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin?
Usually,
Really?
yeah.
Okay, so it's very dependent on where you are. So quantify those things, figure out how often they're doing, then you can decide, is this activity, is this exercise? So physical fitness, how do we define that? Well, there's many different factors or things that make up physical fitness. So it could be for cardiorespiratory endurance. It may mean to make you stronger. It may mean to make you be able to run longer and for a greater distance for a longer period of time. It may increase the power of your muscles. It may increase your speed. You want to be on a bike and go faster. Your flexibility, your agility, you're a gymnast, your balance, your reaction time, your body composition. So that's exercise intentionality to do and change one of those things. So if you look under metabolic equivalence of task, let me show you this one. So if you look at exercise and lifestyle, in almost all studies, exercise will be linked to longer life. It will usually be linked to, I haven't seen any that aren't linked to a difference in all-cause mortality goes down. Some will look at cardiovascular deaths due to cardiovascular events. Those usually go down. So if you look at this one, they're looked at 3 different age groups. Blue is the middle age, a little bit older middle age, 55 to 64 is red, and the green are the elderly. So if you look at exercise versus quitting smoking, so quitting smoking is better if you're doing that. If you don't have hypertension, exercising is about equivalent to that. No obesity, it's very equivalent. Exercising and quitting smoking, probably the biggest impacts on long-term survivability. So it's right up there. So exercising makes a big difference in terms of survival. Okay. Metabolic equivalent of task is one way you can kind of compare different things that people do. So METs are expressed in changes in oxygen consumption, but we don't usually talk that way. So it's a metabolic expense to the body. The higher the MET level of the activity you engage in, the better. We would like to shoot for about 3 to 6 METs a day or in an activity. And it's very accomplishable. So brisk walking, 3 miles an hour or more. So that's 20 miles an hour. I mean, a 20-minute mile, sorry. So that's very doable, especially by your age and by most adults. You get above 6 METs a day, that's very vigorous. And what you see in the studies is this. If this is 1 MET, this is 2 METs, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5, this is 6. This is all-cause mortality. You see it go down as the MET level of exercise increases. Okay? Just another way to measure it. But you can get, you can find tables that will tell you the METs. So for walking briskly is 3.3 METs, so it's at the lower end. Biking casual, less than 10 miles an hour, I can do that, that's 4 METs. If any of you ski at 6 to 8 METs, let's see, the bigger runners, depending on your how fast, they have an 8 mile per hour is 13.5. Okay. So that's what METs are. If you look under physical inactivity, we are, as a country, fairly physically inactive. The majority of adults don't exercise. 80% of Americans do not meet the government's national physical activity requirements, which is 150 minutes of exercise a day, a week. 45% of adults are not active enough to achieve health benefits. So there's room for almost everybody to change. In Oklahoma, we're not number 1, we're not at the bottom. So number 1 is actually the bottom, the worst. So we're number 9. 28.5% of adults are physically inactive. The most is Arkansas, I think. The best, Colorado and Utah. If you look at the obesity charts, they're usually the lowest. Utah's not as low, but Colorado lowest in obesity, highest in exercise. So they tend to go together. Arkansas, one of the worst in exercise, one of the worst in obesity. Mississippi's right up there too. So the two tend to go hand in hand. Next page, sedentary behavior has been linked to risk of premature mortality. You look at the cardiovascular literature, it's right up there with smoking. People who are inactive or people who smoke have similar mortalities that have existing heart disease. Extended sitting, you all fall into this. I fall into this when I'm not down here, usually at a computer. So there has been increased attention on prolonged sitting, that it is an increased risk for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And they tell us even worse news is that if you exercise, you can't even offset that. I think you do the best you can. So replacing sitting time with a decrease is associated with a decrease on mortality. So hopefully as you leave here, this room, you could, if you can, increase your activity. I have talked about putting exercise sessions in between, like at 10 o'clock or at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What would you all think about that if we did that maybe a few days a week? Really? Really, would you do it? Because most of the time when we have a break, you guys just sit here.
If it was like 5 minutes as a group, that would probably be
Like 15 minutes, if you did that, you would do that?
something where you can get sweaty, so we
We have napping time and stuff.
Really?
do something.
Yeah, if I had the choice to sit, I would do nothing. I'd take a nap.
Yeah.
Say what?
Oh, we were just saying, like, I won't do burpees, but I will for a walk.
What are burpees?
Oh,
I didn't know it had a name. Okay, all right. What if it was something like Tai Chi or, really?
I don't know.
Do you lead it?
Huh?
We were also saying, do you lead it? Because then we'll definitely.
Oh. Andrew, do you do Tai Chi? We had a resident over at Family Medicine who was fantastic, so he would do it every day at lunch. So you remind me of him, so I wondered if it was, because you tend to be, you seem physically fit, so I thought maybe Okay, so I'll keep thinking about that and see. I've talked to Maria Jones, because she's wanting to incorporate it into her curriculum. I think it would be good. I feel bad for you all that you sit all day. I do. It would be nice. Okay, let's look at, on page 4. So these are evidence of health benefits with regular physical activity. So strong evidence that it lowers the risk of early death, lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease, all those types of events, diabetes, blood pressure. I can tell you that if I walk at night and compared to the nights that I don't walk, my morning blood sugar, and sometimes blood pressure, even an hour or two after I exercise, it can go as low as 90 over 60, sorry. So sometimes I will get that low if I've been very vigorous and I've walked a long time. And usually I'm about 20 points above that. So it really does, for me, has a profound effect. Prevention of weight gain, promoting weight loss, those things you're familiar with, improving cardiovascular and muscular fitness, preventing falls. So in the elderly, balance, big thing, is really important. Reducing depression, better cognitive function for older adults, and there's some evidence that even in younger adults, it improves cognitive function across the years. So those are really strong evidence. You would think everybody would jump up and exercise all the time, but we have to work at it, we have to make it intentional. Moderate to strong evidence of better functional health in older adults, reduced abdominal obesity. There is no study that I have seen that has not showed that at any point in life, if you start to exercise, you don't get improvements and fall off in all-cause mortality, even at older adults. The only problem with exercise is there's no legacy. If you were a great athlete in high school, it doesn't help you if you don't exercise again till you're 50. Okay? But any exercise makes a big difference, and I think that's the point to get across to patients. You've got to move at whatever pace, whatever rate, and for however long you do it. So even baby steps of 5 minutes for as much as you can do is a big deal. I was in Enid last week and working with a group of family physicians, and the person before me talked, he was a cardiologist, and he was talking about peripheral vascular disease. He does all their PADs in town. And one of the things he said is that with PAD, he said no matter how bad they are, he said they will get better if you will just simply have them move, walk. He says the first thing we do is we get them to walk as much as they can. And so they improve, they get better, and often it can reduce their need for surgery. Moderate evidence, this is for older folks, lower hip fractures, especially in those prone to osteoporosis, so for your women, promote their walking. Lower risk of lung cancer, lower risk of endometrial cancer, increased bone density, improved sleep quality. Mark and I went to Czechoslovakia in the late 80s, 89 I think. What struck me so much was that most of my relatives were smokers and drinkers. Have I told you this? Because they would, it was so funny, when they found out you were in medicine, they would bring you, they have their charts at home, and they would bring out their medical charts and show them to you. So as I'm looking through them, I'm amazed. But these people can't, my uncle could sprint up a mountain. Now, he was a smoker and a drinker, probably 70 years old, and I'm 30, and he is running up those mountains, and I can't keep up with him. But they walk everywhere. They had cars, but they just didn't use them. So they walked everywhere. You walked into town every day and got your groceries and walked back home. They lived on the 3rd floor of their building, and so they had to walk up those flights every day. And I never saw an elevator in any building, so all the older folks always walked. So I was just amazed. I'm amazed at the power of moving and keep moving. Okay, let's see. So, where did I put this one? I must have taken it out. Okay, so on mortality, if you're looking down at the bottom graph, you can see that with all increasing duration of activity also continues to see a downward line in decreasing premature mortality. So going back up, again, you'll see a lot reducing all-cause mortality or reducing usually cardiovascular deaths. They'll look at those two things. Beneficial effects appear to be dose-dependent. Shouldn't say dose, probably length-dependent. So the longer you exercise, the more benefit there is. And there is a caveat in there that 100 minutes a day, you probably start to see a plateau in benefits. So that's quite a bit. A lot of the guidelines are pushing 90 minutes a day of exercise. So I think that's probably reflecting this data. Let's see. So in terms of vigorous or moderate activity, where's the evidence on that? So looking under that second big bullet, so vigorous activity, so 20 minutes a week, or 20 minutes at a time, 3 days a week. So decreased mortality risk in men and women in the 50 to 70 year age. Framingham looked at saw increased life expectancy when you had people doing 30 minutes a day, 4 times a week. So it's not a big chunk out of your day. Cardiovascular disease, next page. There is an inverse relationship. The more you exercise, the less likely you are to die of heart disease. Good effects, exercise tends to affect HDL. Men tend to benefit from this more than women. Women already tend to have high HDLs, but men will see great increases in HDL if they exercise. And triglycerides usually tend to come down. Doesn't have that much effect on LDL or total cholesterol, so it's mostly the HDL and triglycerides. Decrease in inflammation, if you follow CRP, C-reactive protein, or look at interleukin-6, great reductions in inflammation. That's thought to be one of the things that really contributes to the fact that you get a decrease in cardiovascular events. Blood pressure goes down, stroke risk goes down. So looking at this one, you see the effects of, what is that one, event rate per 1,000 persons. Inactive, the highest. Occasional, better than nothing. Light, about the same. Moderate, so you see an increase in intensity tends to pay off. What you do see is that the very highest levels and intensity of exercise, often you will see a kind of a J response. You see the levels of events go up. So the people are most vulnerable to events that are like cardiovascular events or an event that will cause them great injury, usually when they're moving from one intensity to the next. So if people are light exercisers and they're going to move up to more moderate, there's usually a risk associated with that. At the very highest level, where people are exercising for long periods of time and at a very high level, that's your highest risk. It is still low. I'll show you some data. It is still minuscule in terms of the benefits that you get from exercise. Okay. Comments or questions about those? Diabetes. Diabetes, huge benefit from exercise. In almost every study, I've never seen one that didn't show a positive benefit. This one looks at and this is looking at the development of diabetes. So it's the percent of risk reduction associated with 150 minutes or more a week versus 2 hours of watching TV. So I'm like, can you do both at the same time? Because I often am grading papers or working my stuff and I'm watching TV in the evening, and I also walk every day. So, but you see the positive effects of one versus the other. Another one, exercise and risk of diabetes. So this one is looking at kilocalories of energy expended. So they're looking at 500 calories per week, to 3,500. So if you're looking at a mile to walk a mile costs you about 100 calories. So that's kind of where the 10,000 steps comes in. That is about 5 miles, that's about 500 calories. Versus, so if you walked every day at that rate or that expended that kind of energy, you can see the risk reduction is huge. It goes from 1 to 0.52. So it just drives home. Activity matters or exercise matters. One other with diabetes, I think. Here is, here's the risk of diabetes and exercise frequently. So this is the relative risk of getting diabetes. If you don't exercise, that's here. 1 time a week, drops it a lot. 2 to 4 times a week, drops it a lot. 5 to 6, you're a little bit down, but you continue, a little plateau, but continue to increase in benefit. This is diabetes risk and aerobic fitness. So relative risk, versus aerobic fitness quartile. So huge, if you go from 25% to 50, it's huge. Huge, from nothing to 25%. A little makes a big difference. Then 50% to 75 to 100, you continue to see reduction. So I'm telling you, you get it across to your patients. Small amounts of weight loss matter. Small amounts of activity matter. It's important to them to know that little things can pay off in big ways because it will seem overwhelming to many who have not started. Cancer prevention. Exercise is linked to cancer prevention. Now this may be because people who exercise tend to adopt a more healthy lifestyle. Maybe they eat differently, maybe they exercise differently, maybe they don't smoke. But this one looked at people, these reductions in these folks, and this was a huge cohort. They had a pool that was 1.44 million men and women. And they followed them, I think it was 11 years. And yes, 11 years. And these reductions were regardless of what the person weighed, what their smoking history was. And this was their, let's see, I don't remember how much they exercised. But anyway, look at the reductions in cancer risk. 23% kidney, 26% lung, 27% liver, 42% esophageal. It's big. People who exercise who get cancer usually tend to live longer and respond better to therapy and do better. So it makes a difference. Okay. Obesity. Osteoporosis, we've talked about, increases bone mineral density. You want weight bearing to be able to keep those bones healthy. Smoking cessation, exercise even helps with that. It seems to facilitate people who are trying to quit, and people who have quit, it tends to help them keep off the weight. It's one of the big negatives, particularly for women, is that they quit smoking, they gain weight. So having them adopt an exercise program may help in that. Gallstones, decreased risk of symptomatic cholelithiasis. Function and cognitive improvement go up. Psychological well-being goes up. So many, many positives. Comments there. Think of a comment so you can keep awake. You can see your flag. Zane.
There's this gentleman in my apartment, he's an older guy, and he obviously has some type of deficit, but our trash can is like kind of far off in the corner of our apartment complex. And at the beginning of the year, I saw him walking, and he was like struggling really hard while carrying his trash out to the garbage. But now he does it, you know, every single time, and my apartment is like right in view of that, so I see him sometimes. And like recently, since he's been continuously doing it, like I noticed his strides are a little bit more normal, and yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Okay, very good. Anybody else have another story? Lauren.
My dad, he was just telling me a few months ago, he's very active, like we grew up on an old farm, so he's always doing stuff, but he was telling me a few months ago that his doctor said I guess he's starting to get like some kidney edema. I mean, my dad's 65, but he's like, well, why? I'm active, and his doctor told him he should be like doing vigorous walking. He was like asking me, I'm up all the time, but I was telling him, yeah, I mean, there's something to that. So he's like, okay, I guess I'll start walking now. But just how people, they don't correlate the physical activity with, or exercising with physical activity, so.
Right, very good. Anybody else? Okay, was your activity level better, the same, worse before you came into PA program?
Better.
It was better. Okay, so since you definitely can see a difference, then how does it make you feel? How do you think that plays out for you?
Poorly.
You don't have the energy,
Feel kind of yucky.
feeling bad?
Yeah.
My back hurts all the time.
Really?
These chairs.
Yeah, the chairs are terrible.
Gained weight since January.
Oh, weight's gone up, yeah.
I used to sleep better when I like did more physical activity.
Slept better, okay. How about stress level?
Hard to tell.
Hard to tell.
I worked out the most during anatomy, actually. I'd go to the anatomy lab and then bring clothes and work out here.
Mm-hmm,
It would help with my stress then, because I was pretty stressed out there.
mm-hmm.
Then I kind of stopped. But
Taylor, were you an athlete up until the time you entered
Yeah, oh, well, a year before.
year before?
Yeah, I took a year off between.
So what did you notice, since you probably were at a fairly high level?
Oh, yeah, walking up the stairs. Like before, I could
Really?
just take off and go run 5 miles and it not be anything. But now, like, it's a struggle to do like 1 or 2 every morning.
Wow. So what would help in this year? Okay, so we maybe made some standard or offered opportunities. What would help in that regard?
I don't think it's opportunities, I think it's just a break from school too. Cause like, I mean, earlier on, I was like, oh, I can get a nap in, or I can run 3 miles and run a nap.
Uh-huh.
You know, think how,
Okay,
If classes ended at like 3 instead of 5,
yeah.
or at least a couple of days.
Or started
at
later.
10 versus 8 and went to 5, you know, if it was 10 to 5, okay, because then in the mornings, like, I would go every morning when we started, and now, like, it's like non-existent.
how do you exercise in the morning?
Now or before?
How many of you exercise in the evening? I'm an evening. About half and half.
I think it would help to do it like in the middle of the day, like you said, but part of the problem is the scheduling being sporadic. So like you said, unless you're in a routine, you're not gonna do it every time, and we don't know what our week looks like from week to week, so it just makes it hard to be consistent about it.
Okay, all right, good feedback. All right, risk of exercise. Okay. So the biggest risk is usually musculoskeletal injury, and it's usually due to overuse. So if you look there, it's listed under musculoskeletal injury, so acute strains and tears, inflammation, various kinds. Lauren, is it your young girl, the volleyball player?
Mhm.
So Lauren has a young woman in a high school that she's taking care of that is a volleyball player. And she's been back multiple times. What is her injury?
She has tendinitis.
In her knee,
Mhm.
right? She plays volleyball and then she works at night. So she has an overuse injury. I think that's what y'all decided it's due to.
She's better.
Good, good. Other more serious can include arrhythmia, sudden cardiac arrest, and MI. So we'll talk about who's more at risk for those. So the arrhythmias tend to come in people who have underlying heart disease, or they have a history of an arrhythmia. Exercise training can actually help them if they approach it gradually and build over time. It can actually reduce those arrhythmias because their heart gets stronger. So if they focus on cardiovascular training and strengthening, they can decrease that rate. Sudden cardiac death. So a lot of people know about figures that have been prominent that have died. What was his name? Jim Fixx? He was a long-distance runner. He ran because his dad died very early, like at 40, dropped dead. So he was a marathon runner and a big proponent of exercise. He too died at a young age, about 50, dropped dead. But he always, that was attributed, his family attributed his longer life due to his, to the exercise he put in. So sudden cardiac death, rare. It usually occurs in people who have usually prodromes, there's something wrong, they know something's wrong, but it hasn't been worked up. Or it's at the very highest risk or highest vigorous activity that they can carry out. Or it occurs too in people who are kind of weekend warriors. They don't do anything all week and then they exercise very heavily on the weekend. That's a problem. So people who have heart disease, if they exercise habitually on a very regular basis, that actually brings them a lot of benefit and they rarely have the cardiac sudden death. The ones who have very big shifts in exercise intensity tend to be the ones that get into trouble. So be on the lookout. So there's always this, if you're gonna, there's the recommendation that if you're going to start an exercise program, see your doctor. Well, the American College of Sports Medicine came out a couple of years ago and said, don't do that. Most people under 40, unless they have a cardiovascular risk, there's really no reason. If they have no cardiovascular risk factors, don't do it. If they're older and you suspect that they have or you know they have cardiovascular risk factors, those are the people to screen, to pre-screen before they exercise. So, let's look at, we'll come back to that, pre-screening. A couple of other things that can occur, rhabdomyolysis. So if you are intensely long duration exercising, like a marathon runner, you're at more risk for rhabdo. And with that, you can lead to acute renal failure. So it really is a very serious complication of exercise. Look down in the middle section under massive rhabdo. Here are the people who are more likely to experience this. So those who are not trained, but take out on and do something way above their abilities. Hot, humid conditions, so what the ambient temperature is. Football players, with they're wearing heavy equipment and it's hot, can be at risk. People with sickle cell disease, especially if they're in higher altitudes, will have more sickling. Electrolyte abnormalities, low potassium being a problem. Bronchoconstriction, so you know about asthma and the effects of exercise can bring asthma out. So what do we do to prevent that or to decrease the risk of it?
The Sabo?
We pre-treat with what?
Sabo?
Yes, with a short-acting bronchodilator. So before, 15 minutes before, during, if they're experiencing symptoms, can be done before. Will go a long way to decreasing those symptoms. Other effects, hyperthermia, hypothermia, dehydration. I told you the story about when I was in Austin at one of the marathons. I told you about that, man. So we have, it's early spring, and it gets hot in Austin pretty early. After March, it's usually over with. Spring's done, we're moving on to summer. So we had, yes, it was Austin. So we had a marathon and a young man, he was probably in his late 20s, dropped dead. So they brought him in and they did an autopsy on him and they brought his brain to the mortality and morbidity conference. And it was like Swiss cheese. All the white matter was gone. It was just gone. It looked like Swiss cheese, the slices of his brain. It was incredible. So he had overheated, and it was very humid that day, and he died on the trail. So hyperthermia, heat-related deaths, or risk from mild fatigue to death. Dehydration, another problem. Women, athletes can experience amenorrhea and infertility due to low body weight, low body fat. Osteoporosis can also be seen in younger women who are at risk and who have disordered eatings. And then exercise-associated hyponatremia can also occur. So those are more the extremes, so it's either going to happen in those who are really fit and are going through really extreme exercises or durations, or it's the unfit who end up in situations that they're not trained or prepared for. Okay, page 10. So evaluating the person prior to exercise. So the purpose is to try and identify who's at risk, and then once doing that, advise them on how to start or how to, at what level to begin. So screening is not necessary for those who are at low risk for coronary artery disease. Usually that's going to be 40 and under, no risk factors. Okay. Exercise is safe. Show you. So here's absolute risk of acute vigorous intensity exercise is low. So in the Physician's Health Study, it was 1 in every 1.5 million episodes of vigorous activity was there an MI or a cardiac event or a sudden death. Nurses' Health Study, 1 in every 36.5 million hours of moderate or vigorous exercise. Joggers in Rhode Island, 1 death per almost 400,000 hours of jogging. YMCA participants, 1 death in 2.8 million person hours of exercise. So you get the idea, it's rare. Okay? Not something to be afraid of or to prevent you from starting exercise. So certain groups in which screening is warranted. Asymptomatic folks with lots of risk factors. They smoke, they have diabetes, they're hypertensive. Those would be important. Or if they have a history of a premature MI or sudden cardiac death in a first-degree relative. How to test? No clear consensus. So the recommendation by the College of Sports Medicine is to do a exercise, what do you call it? EKG testing while exercising at risk. I don't know how many people actually do that. I think most, at least from the physicians I worked, most of them just tell them, get a pair of shoes and start walking. Unless they're, honestly, I worked with an endo, she said everybody can walk. That was her response to everyone. So factors that may influence risk are listed there: age, their general physical condition, their history of exercising, what kinds of bone or skeletal or muscle problems they already have, medications that they're on. So remember, beta blockers, how do those influence exercise? Tired because of what? It's heart rate. They can't mount a heart rate response in the lieu of, or when faced with excess demand. Okay? That's why they get tired. That's why they can't exercise as much. Or they may complain about it. History of pulmonary disease could certainly limit. History of peripheral vascular disease would limit. Handicaps, disabilities, back injuries, hip pain, knee pain, all of those. So the thing to do is to figure out where the person is, what do they like, what do they want to do, what are they willing to do, and give them some guidance of how to start. There's all kinds of nice charts on the internet that will give you, that'll map out, like in 12 weeks, here's what you do. Like for walking, for people who've never walked, they're overweight, they have no conditioning, it'll show them 5 minutes every day, that's it. And then the next week it'll advance them. I usually tell people start wherever you can and at whatever speed you can and for whatever length you can. Usually if they've not exercised at all, I'll tell them just do 5 minutes or do 5 minutes multiple times a day and then advance it as you can. And then try to set goals with them. Often people are just unrealistic about the goals that they set. So helping them set realistic goals is better and great. So there's a thing called the exercise prescription. It's in your handout. So the things to address is how often do you want to do it? Depends on where you are. If you haven't started, then 3 days a week may be the best place to start. Consistency will help them gain the ability to tolerate it. The intensity. So you can look at maximum heart rate. Usually, one thing I like, this is at the, oh shoot. At the end. If you look at the end of your handout, this is perceived exertion. Those of you in gyms, have you seen these posted? Do any of you work out in a gym?
I see it on like certain equipment,
Yeah.
I feel like more than anything.
Exactly. Some gyms will post it on the wall, on a machine. But I like this one because it gives you a range from 1 to 10. And it's a good way for people to kind of judge their own ability to tolerate exercise. It goes from how do you perceive it? How difficult is this for you? And so I'll write it down in the chart. Patient says they walk 15 minutes a day and it seems to be of no problem. If they're telling me that, then I'll tell them, okay, increase your length or your duration. Okay. So what you want to see is that it's getting better. And any time that their perceived benefit or perceived exertion is getting lighter or better, then it's time for them to increase if they're not at the goal yet. So I think that's better than trying to capture a maximum heart rate unless they're on a machine that will do that. Duration, anywhere from whatever they can tolerate up to an hour a day. Modality, pick the thing that they are most interested in. If they like to walk, if they want to start running, then working with them on that. If they want to use some type of machine, they've got something at home, cycle, bike at home, whatever they have, swimming. They go to a Zumba class or whatever it is. Working with them on what they like. People will stick with what they like. And then also increase and use resistance training, add that in, so that they're working upper muscles and lower muscles groups as well, at least a couple of days a week. So that's the exercise prescription. Those are the ingredients that should be in there. It's good if you will document it in the chart and then look back as you're trying to get people to increase that, increase their goals towards the guidelines, which are on page 12. So let's look at all of these. For overall cardiovascular health, the recommendation is 30 minutes a day for at least 5 days a week. So the total is 150. A lot of that comes out of the diabetes prevention program, where they found that the reduction in movement from prediabetes to diabetes was best in those who exercise at least 150 minutes a week. Comes from some others. There's some good Seventh-day Adventist studies that also found that number to be good. Or 25 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity 3 times a week for a total of 75 minutes. So it goes to intensity if people are wanting to do that. And then moderate to high intensity muscles or strength training. For older adults, the guidelines are the same as for younger. If they can't do 150, then it is then you encourage them to be as active as they can. Having things that improve balance, whether that be yoga or the use of with help of those balance balls or bars, those are important as well. Determining their level of effort, their physical activity relative to their fitness is important in advising them. And then chronic conditions. If they have diabetes or if they have, and they've got neuropathies, keeping that in mind. If they have heart disease, keeping that in mind. If they have retinopathy in terms of things that might increase pressure in the eyes, keep that in mind. Children and adolescents, so a little bit different with kids. With kids, the recommendation is that they exercise 60 minutes a day. They have a little bit different prescription for them. They want it to be aerobic, but they want it to be the things kids do. Playing basketball, running, biking, dancing. And they want muscle strength training. So look at how they use it with kids. As part of their 60 minutes, so it would be climbing trees, I love that, using playground equipment, lifting weights, that might be more appropriate in the older kids, And then bone strengthening. So remember, your peak bone is about 35, but really a lot of it's before you're in your teens and your early 20s. So things like running, jump roping, as included in that 60 minutes. Okay. Questions about those? Okay, all right, why don't you get up and move around?